start with roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Hatley? Here. Commissioner Casabon?
Here.
Commissioner Korbacki?
Here.
Chair Thornburg?
Here.
Commissioner Journey?
Here. Quorum, we're good?
Yes, you have a quorum.
Okay, are there any speaker slips from the audience or oral communications?
None.
None. Okay, item D, approval of the minutes from October 14th. Do you have any comments? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Jinx.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Okay, passes. Anything on the consent agenda? There's nothing here, so we'll move on to the new business. And first up is the speed surveys.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Bayhart. I'm here to discuss today's certification of the speed surveys. I'm Engineer 1 with the City of Escondido's Traffic Engineering Department. I just want to give you guys a brief history of the speed surveys, how they're conducted, and the new Assembly Bill 43 that was amended and came into effective January 1st, 2022. Governor Newsom signed this bill, and this new bill encompasses additional factors for an engineer to consider when performing a speed survey analysis. The amendment will also help cities enforce speeds on any particular segment. When we do perform the speed surveys, they are updated periodically every 5, 7, or 14 years to adhere to the California Vehicle Code. And we do these updates to reflect any and all current conditions that are out there. We do get the prevailing speed of 100 vehicles when we do our analysis and determine what the 85th percentile is. And from that 85th percentile, we either take that to the nearest 5-mile-an-hour increment. So for example, if the 85th percentile came out to 37 miles an hour, we would round the speed limit down to 35. Alternatively, if it came out to 38 miles an hour, we would round that up to 40 miles an hour. We could also round that down to the lower 5 miles an hour increment per CVC section 22358.6. Also, with this new amendment, if a local authority, after completing an engineering and traffic survey, finds the speed limit is still more than is reasonable or safe, the local authority may, by ordinance, retain the current speed limit or restore the immediately prior speed limit. This is with the new CVC section 22358.8. Part of our analysis not only includes the prevailing speeds, but also the accident data. We include the crossroads data from PD that they give us, and we compare that to the statewide average for each road classification. So for this commission, I'm presenting 15 speed surveys, and the ones that are in bold either needed to be rounded down or indicates the speed limit being retained per CVC section 22358.8. And does anyone have any questions regarding the 15 speed segments or anything that I talked about previously?
No question. Well, it looks like there are no changes being requested. Everything is remaining as it was, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I did read it correctly then. Thank you.
I had a question not about the specific speed surveys, but about the AB 43 with the new regulations up to 14 years. I know the city typically in the past has tried to do them, as evidenced by this, about every 7 years, unless there has been major construction or changes necessitating a new speed survey. I was curious if the city had a plan, like, are we going to still continue trying to do them every 7 years, or are we going to extend closer to the 14, or split the difference?
I think our plan is to try to continue to reevaluate them every 7 years, but if we feel that there has been no changes, we do look at the accident rate, the volumes, the existing roadway conditions, and we determine that it should go and be extended to 14 years, and we will do that. To extend it to 14 years, we look at all the conditions that are out there. So.
Do we need action on this item?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you.
Thank you.
What's next? Next is the report on the local
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Craig Williams, Associate Engineer for the city in the engineering group. And I wanted to give you a final update on the local road safety plan. If you remember, we had come to you initially in July, I believe, and talked a little bit about the kickoff, and came back to you in October and gave you an update, and we're here to kind of talk about the final document. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So as I had sort of mentioned, the kickoff was back in May. Michael Baker International had done the local road safety plan for us, and we had selected them because they have a history of doing those kinds of documents, and I want to say that we've been very pleased with the work that they have done for us. June, they had started the crash data. July to October, had done some more crash analysis, and I'll get into this little graphic in the next slide just because I think it tells a good story. We met with stakeholders in August and in November of last year. After that time, they started evaluating countermeasures. Then they did a process called validation of recommendations, where they went out in the field and kind of said, yeah, that looks right. We'll go ahead with that recommendation. Then they started on the actual document itself, and today last week we had sent you a copy of the final draft, and we hope to present that to City Council next month, sorry. I wanted to come back to this graphic because I think now that we've been through the process, I think that it's helpful to go back through because it really kind of reminds us why this told a good story. The first thing we did was identify stakeholders. So a lot of you are on the stakeholder group, and that involved also police and fire and schools and a number of other folks that are involved currently in the process of evaluating crashes and recommendations in the city. And as we move on around, you can see using safety data. Part of the process, a big part of the process, was collecting crashes over a very finite period. Caltrans was very definite about the fact that they wanted crashes from 2014 through the end of 2020. That, as we went through the process, was a little bit sticky because we had, as you know, we had a number of crashes around the city that happened in 2021, but they aren't part of the time frame that Caltrans had identified. But I say that because one of the things we'll use this document for is not just applying for Caltrans grants through the Highway Safety Improvement Program, but we'll use it for a myriad of things because it's really the best look that we've had at crashes around the city in recent years. Perhaps I'm not sure that anybody knew that we'd done anything like this before. So it's really very helpful information. Choose proven solutions. You had seen in some of the other documents and perhaps in your review of the local road safety plan, Federal Highway Administration is very definite about the research that they've done to identify what countermeasures work best for certain kinds of typical crashes. So that was a process that was followed quite closely. For example, this little slide here that says Chevron signs reduce nighttime crashes by 25%. Again, this is research that Federal Highways has done over the past decades, and they clearly wanted agencies, in order to make these documents consistent in comparing kind of apples and apples, they wanted everyone to use the same information. I think that's very important. As we move around the curve, you'll notice that we've got a roundabout here, and that's actually one of the countermeasures that we'll talk about a little bit, because they are extremely good at reducing crashes, particularly reducing the severity of crashes. And then the sign here says implement solutions, and we've got 3 different categories here: education and enforcement, we'll talk about in a little bit, capital projects, which obviously we'll talk about, and then also maintenance work. And that's another element of the study that we'll use for efforts that we do on our own outside the Highway Safety Improvement Program. And then a great sign that says safer roads ahead. We've got a cyclist and some pedestrians crossing looks like a Continental Crosswalk, so we're in good shape there. And then some signs about pedestrians ahead, and then local road safety plan. Again, it's a good graphic to kind of go over what we've been through in the last 7 or 8 months. Just a little bit of an overview. The purpose of the local road safety plan: to develop a data-driven traffic safety plan. We've heard a lot about data-driven decision-making, and that essentially is what this was. Caltrans in the past, before they had provided funds to agencies around the state, and again, we were able to do this from a $72,000 grant that Caltrans made available to literally any community they ask. And the idea was that we want to be able to distribute highway safety improvement funds to cities, but we want to be able to evaluate projects in an apples to apples and oranges to oranges comparison, rather than having one agency look at it another way and another agency that perhaps isn't as wealthy looking at it in a less robust way. They wanted to create a common way of comparing and distributing funds. So part of the process, we developed this citywide hotspot map of crashes. I reiterated the same map that we've all seen before, ranking the top intersections and mid-block locations, determining countermeasures for crash types, prioritized list of improvements, and then finally, and perhaps most importantly, to meet state requirements for the city to qualify for its Highway Safety Improvement Program grant funding. And that's a pretty big deal. You may remember this slide from the draft report. It talks about certain kinds of crashes, where those crashes occur, and then what the associated crash costs were for that. And if you're anything like I am, you wanted to say, where did they come up with that number of crash costs? Anybody else have that question? Good. I hope to be able to answer that for you, so you don't even have to ask it. Because I actually had to look, when we looked in the report, it made a reference to a certain document. I found that document, and this literally is a quote from the Federal Highway Administration: "The human capital crash costs to society of fatalities and injuries from highway crashes. These estimates include the monetary losses associated with medical care, emergency services, property damages, lost productivity, and the like to society as a whole." So the idea was that they're saying that our research shows that one fatality at a signalized intersection has a societal cost of $1.59 million. and then a non-signalized 2.5 million, so on. So that's really the basis, one of the bases that Caltrans uses in order for the benefit cost ratio that we talked about in the report, and then I'll talk about in a minute here. So we looked at the top 10 intersections that we discussed actually at the last meeting. For example, Center City Parkway and El Norte. We know that that's a huge intersection. Over the 5-year period, there were 3 severes, 12 other visible injuries, 27 complaint of pain, 8 property damage only, a total of 50 intersections, total crash cost, using that formula that Federal Highways and the Highway Safety Manual developed, came up with a crash cost of $8.7 million. And remember, then you'll see that number later on in some of the projects itself. I won't go through every one of these, but I do want to highlight number 3, Center City Parkway, Escondido Boulevard. We all realize that that is a challenging intersection. We've had, at least in the 5 years of the years that we looked at for the study, 1 fatal, 1 severe, 11 visibles, go on and on, for a total of about 5.8 million. So skipping forward, the next slide. I'm sorry, I wanted to throw in one other thing. One thing I left off in that chart in the previous slide was the crash rate. We actually asked Michael Baker to look at that because it isn't actually a factor in the Caltrans formula for evaluating projects. But we wanted to understand whether or not these 50 crashes, we wanted to understand the relevance of, well, it's 50 crashes through an intersection that has a ton of traffic. I say ton because I don't know what the number is. But you can see each of these, but you can see that 0.54 for Center City Parkway compares to a number 4, Quince and Washington. There's a pretty high number for crash costs there, but we all know that the volume of traffic going through that intersection is less. Now, we're not going to use it for this particular effort on the Caltrans projects that we submit for grant funding, but we'll use that kind of information when we use the document for other kinds of analyses, be it capital improvement projects that we're doing that are city-funded, maintenance projects, things like that. So I wanted to share that thought for a moment. The countermeasures, I blew this slide up so we could talk about a couple of different things. And you'll see a number of things in here that we don't do, but they're still part of the palette. We don't do the number 2 item, which is reduce left turn conflicts intersections. That's actually a design that they use called a Michigan left. They use it in the clearly state of Michigan. So under leading pedestrian interval, you'll see a number of references to that. Obviously, a countermeasure is doing a local road safety plan, which is what we're talking about today. Backplates and retroreflective barriers, you'll see that in a number of the projects that we've shown in the document. Medians and pedestrian crossing islands in urban suburban areas, we see that in quite a few of the projects as well. Other things, dedicated left and right turn lanes, you'll see those kinds of projects, particularly if a development is causing an impact at a particular intersection, causing additional, forcing additional left turns or right turns. One of the mitigations may be to install dedicated left turns or dedicated right turns. Same thing about roundabouts. We talked about it earlier. They are very effective in reducing crashes and reducing the severity of crashes. Walkways, same thing. Pedestrian hybrid beacons. We use rectangular rapid flashing beacons quite a bit here in the city, and it's the same kind of item. Again, in countermeasures, these are kind of interesting because it tells you, gives you a clue as to how the projects were ultimately grouped, and there's quite a clear strategy on that. But if you look just at high pedestrian and high turn frequency, and if you look to the left, you can see, okay, these are some of the countermeasures that work for those kinds of conditions. Same thing under unsignalized intersection. Well, the answer is clearly of course, install a signal, but you could also install and upgrade pedestrian crossings or install rectangular rapid flashing beacons, but it's hard to say fast. So anyway, it gives you a good idea of how those projects were grouped together. This slide, I think, tells a really good story. We have looked at, even back in October, we looked at those 35 intersections that popped up as the highest crash, the hot spots in the city. And you can see in the right-hand column how each one of those 35 is included in one of the projects that appear in the last section of the report. A couple of, well, the 5 examples that we are planning to submit for Caltrans funding, we think in April. Project 1, which was adding pedestrian countdown signal heads and lead pedestrian intervals at these 14 intersections. Project 2, left turn phasing and lead pedestrian interval at these 5 intersections. And I wanted to point out a couple of things here on the chart that I know you've seen before in the report. This benefit cost ratio, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Michael Baker has told us that they feel strongly that the cutoff for whether a project gets approved or not approved is around 10. So for a group of projects that has a benefit cost ratio of 41, that's going to make it fare pretty well in a grant submittal. You can see too the expected benefit. When we talked about crash costs, the total cost of all the crashes of those 14 intersections comes up to $27 million, the societal cost. The total cost of all of those improvements is $649,000. So you can see that the ability to group these intersections in certain kinds of projects has a really strong benefit. Same thing in project number 2, we have a BC ratio of 22.4. Project number 3, we have a BC ratio of 1733, and that's left turn phasing and marked pedestrian crossings for these 7 intersections. Project 4 we worked back and forth with Michael Baker because some of those early ones, some of the larger grouping of intersections included RRFBs on streets that wouldn't meet our current warrants for an RFB. So we removed those and placed those in projects that will probably get submitted later on, but not in this cycle. But you can see we have a total benefit of 19 million, 657 project costs and a BC ratio of 30.3. Project number 5, a project that we're all very interested in. In fact, we have submitted it twice for highway safety improvement funds, although we submitted it down at the Brotherton intersection. Michael Baker's feeling was that this would be a very good candidate to put a signal at Escondido Boulevard at the connector. We've got an expected benefit of about 9 million. Total project costs around 600,000 and a BC ratio of 15. There were a number of deferred projects, and they were all ultimately listed as installing traffic signals at these intersections. But you can see from the BC ratios, because of the cost of the signalized intersection, the numbers fall below 10. Again, this is a recap of the same 35. And then speaking briefly about the implementation plan, we've already kind of reviewed that as we look through those top 5 projects. We list each of those. Cycle 11 is the cycle that's coming up in April. We hope to apply for Highway Safety Improvement Program funding. The interesting thing about those submittals is that the expectation is that you can apply for up to $10 million. And what the beauty of this is that we will be submitting for perhaps the top 25 to 30 intersections in the city in one grant application, and hopefully we'll get some level of approval of that. So we're hopeful. Before I walk away from just CIP projects, I wanted to say also that there are other countermeasures that Federal Highways talks about. Education programs, youth education, senior education, social media. We've talked about radar, speed trailers, checkpoints. We have various things that the police department does with obviously citations, also some tools for enforcement. We talked about rat lights a little bit, I think last time we met or the time before that. And then the implementation plan for the non-CIP projects is on this slide here. So it gives you an idea of some of the various non-CIP projects that the city could pursue. Now, they wouldn't likely be through the Highway Safety Improvement Program because it is primarily capital improvements, but there are a number of other grants available for the city to pursue that would help us with these kinds of projects. So wrapping it up, what's next for the for the Local Road Safety Plan? I mentioned earlier it's the first comprehensive look. It presents a valuable resource to see where crashes are occurring. In future CIP projects, we can take advantage of this information. It's really a go-to resource for us. The police department can use it for future safety operations and for safety grants. There's a lot of information that's there for them to take advantage of that they don't have to go out and collect again. Hopefully that improves their ability to capture additional funds. Obviously, we'll use it as for this next round of highway safety improvement funds, and likely, if the next cycle is 2 years from now, we will use it as best we can for that. We honestly don't know yet what Caltrans requirements are going to be for updating the current version, whether or not they're going to ask for an interim update in the cycle that comes, cycle 12 that comes after this, so we can report to you later on. So for today and hopefully next month, we're asking to recommend approval of the Local Road Safety Plan, forward that plan to City Council for their review and approval, to utilize the plan for Highway Safety Improvement Program grant submittals this spring and for future grant opportunities. Commission action, approve the Local Road Safety Plan, recommend forwarding the plan to City Council for their review and approval. And that is the end of my presentation, and I will answer any questions I'll try to answer any questions you might have, so.
Okay. I love this because it gives you tons of information. I love this because it gives you tons of information. Here, let me do this. It gives you a ton of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of numbers, an easy way to find things. But then if you've got tons of numbers, you have many ways of looking at them. And I'm looking at this and saying, okay, I'm a little confused as to project number 1. The number 1 intersection we have here, Center City and El Norte Parkway, had a total of 49 accidents over this period. 0 were pedestrian accidents. Yet adding pedestrian countdown signal heads and lead pedestrian interval at that intersection, how is that going to stop the 49 non-pedestrian accidents that occurred there? Also with Project One, there's a total of 300, these 14 intersections look like they cover about 357 different accidents, which when you take that 357, you divide that into the 27 million, that comes up to $75,000 cost per accident, which tells me there was not a high human cost in that based on, we look at this and say the human value of things. Yet the pedestrian countdown signals are for humans. So I'm wondering if we put those in, how does that actually reduce the number of non-pedestrian crashes that we're having there? Because it's primarily non-pedestrian. It's rear end, broadside, and side swipe. So it makes me wonder, why is that one there, and will it really help? And I think saving people's lives and protecting people, I think that's very important, okay? I don't want you to get me wrong on that. But I'm looking at this and saying, why put those kind of things there when no one's getting hit? And that's a lot of these on that project number 1 are non-pedestrian incidents. Yet we're putting in pedestrian countdown signal heads.
I would probably have to pose that question to the consultant because it's clearly fairly detailed.
Yeah.
I think in some cases the matter of how they grouped it, and they saw a need to do certain things at all of these intersections. I think that the attempt to, there's a value to the types of overall crashes that occurred at these 14 intersections, to improve signal hardware, also to do countdown signal heads and signal phasing, whether or not the pedestrian crashes or lack thereof, at which I'm surprised that there is a lack thereof, because I watch people cross there all the time.
Yeah, and there's none.
I mean, actually, you've piqued my interest, so I'm going to look into that anyway. But there.
was more of the lines on Valley Parkway, which are also in this group. That's where you have a lot of the pedestrian activity, and that's where the higher pedestrian accidents were in these streets that have more commercial activity. I think this report noted East Valley Parkway. Also, there's Escondido Boulevard, Quince, and so you see those intersections on this list a lot. But you're right, El Norte is the one that's on the top, and maybe they're grouped together.
So I would have to go back to them and ask, but I do think that if you look at particularly, well, countdown signal heads are beneficial to pedestrians at any of these locations. Signal phasing for LPI, because of the length of the crossing, would be advantageous because that intersection is so huge. We can see it in the lower left-hand corner. But the opportunity to improve signal hardware with the retroreflective and all of those factors, they must have felt that that particular intersection would benefit largely from one of those three at least, if not all of them. But again, I'd honestly have to get back to them and find out.
It just seems like, and I'm just wondering, what will that actually do to stop the 49 accidents? And if we're looking to put in protections for pedestrians and pedestrians are not getting hit and cars getting hit, how's that going to help?
Commissioner Durney, if I could, I think Craig's on the right track with respect to, if you look at the countermeasures that have been selected here, the first countermeasure that's listed is to improve the signal hardware, the lenses, to make sure that they're very visible, to add retroreflective backplates to the signals to be sure that people are seeing that the light is turning yellow and then red, so that the rear end collisions, obviously they occur because people are not noticing the signal far enough in advance. They're not slowing down. And so I think that's the key countermeasure for that particular location. You can use up to 3 countermeasures, and because we have a group of 14 different locations, each signal is a little different. Some signals have more of a pedestrian concern, and other signals have more of a just speeding concern, right? But you group them together because you're allowed to use 3 different countermeasures, and each countermeasure improves your benefit cost ratio, right? And so that's the key, right? Is that the more countermeasures you use, the better your outcome is. And so I think that's what the reason they've used 3. They're always using as many as they can. Is it's going to help you with the HSIP application. It's going to make you more competitive. But we're grouping 14 unlike things together in order to give us our best application possible. And certainly adding the pedestrian countdown is a benefit to pedestrians, and it's a relatively low cost measure that just improves your competitiveness when it comes to the HSIP program. I hope that helps explain it.
I'll explain that maybe in terms of my high school kid. So the teacher, Catherine, gives you the rubric, you have to match your data to that rubric.
Exactly, right. So we're trying to, our consultant is helping us to come up with the most competitive project possible, and this project is 14 intersections. So it's going to bring them all together, and you're right, at the Center City Parkway and El Norte location, the key problem is people going too fast, not observing the signals, running red lights. And so these are keys that help prevent those things from happening. It's just you get the added benefit of better crosswalk striping, more pedestrian visibility when you put the 3 countermeasures together into a single project.
Right. And looking at this, adding the pedestrian countdown signal head and the interval, you do that for, it's primarily pedestrians, at least I would think. And based on the total expected benefit and the cost ratio, tells me, again, we haven't had, out of 27 million, if you've had 357 accidents in that spot, which is what the 14 add up to, that tells me there weren't a whole lot of pedestrian accidents in that area, in any of the 14.
If I could add something.
There might be a few. I'm not saying there aren't any, but I'm just trying to say, where are we going?
Sometimes there's kind of a cause and effect, particularly, and I want to say the whole leading pedestrian interval piece, is that if the leading pedestrian interval allows a pedestrian to walk out into the street and be visible by a car, be better visible by a car. If you don't have a leading interval, as a car comes up to the intersection and wants to turn right, for example, or wants to turn left, if the pedestrian steps off the curb at the same time the car is already starting that movement, that car, fortunately in our case, stopped because they didn't have a pedestrian crash, but they may have gotten rear-ended because they had stopped abruptly, so they didn't hit that pedestrian. So you could have a crash that perhaps was a result of a pedestrian violation of right-of-way, but it ended up in a car-to-car crash.
And I could see that happening now and then, not all 357 though.
Yeah, well. Well, I think as Julie had said, I think the whole idea of trying to group these and take advantage of the process and the particularly for the signal hardware improvements, that's great.
And overall, I do have to say I'm all for it. I just look at these numbers though, and it makes me question. When you give me more information and more data and more statistics, there are more ways to look at it, bend it, twist it, and figure it out.
Clearly, you jumped into it pretty deep. That's good.
And Commissioner Derner, if I could add, I mean, I think with that particular intersection, Center City Parkway and El Norte, it's just the sheer volume of people coming through there. I mean, it is.
Your volume of cars coming.
There's cars, exactly. There is just so many. So there's going to be a very high frequency or a very high number of collisions just because there are so many people coming through there. And so these types of measures, you can see the total project cost is $649,000 for 14 intersections. They're relatively low cost measures that improve the signal visibility and also improve the timing so that as people go through the intersection, they know what to expect and they're able to adjust. They're not going too fast. And so, I think it's evidence that the intersection is relatively safe, even though it's our top ranked intersection. That's a good thing. It's just there are so many people going through there. And so what can we do to make it better? And these are relatively low cost, very effective measures to really make sure that people are obeying, what the signal tells them to do, and they're not speeding through.
Those are lots of vehicles going through.
Lots of vehicles.
Vehicles, not people. Because when you say people, I think people going
yeah.
And on Center City, come on, that's a free-for-all with no speed limit posted, so it's the unknown speed limit.
No,
Which
no
those of
free
us who
for all
know
in the city.
know what it is.
The traffic's a little tiny, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions, Mr. Derby?
I lost track of the other ones I might have had, so we'll keep going.
I gotta go along with Bill, and it just seems like, especially at Center City and El Norte, since the one that we're talking about, me driving through it a lot, it is very confusing by itself. I think these are good things to add, but I don't think it really covers the issue of what the problems are. When you use the unsafe speeding primary collision factor, it's very general. It could be a rear end, it could be they blew the red light possibly because they were trying to go through the yellow faster. There could be so many things. I don't think it's nuanced enough. And I some of these fixtures are good. They're nice. They're maybe low expensive. I just don't think they're really going to address, the issues that seem to be with it. And I hate putting a Band-Aid over something bigger, spend the $649,000 when there should be maybe more of a grander plan for certain areas that especially have more traffic towards that. I don't know if this is going to be something we're going to put up and then 2 years later, okay, we're going to tear it back down and do something more. I just, I always think that it's just frustrating to see sometimes where it just seems like something's put up there and then 2 years later it's changed because most of that intersection has been already covered over. They've done the asphalt already and everything. So obviously you're not going to make big changes. These little changes might help, but I don't think it's really addressing the problems with it. So I don't know if we're just going to do that and say, okay, we'll see what happens, or we're going to keep looking at more things to try to reduce that speed for that, because it doesn't. When it gets for the intersections, tell me if I'm missing it out. For the intersections, I don't see when it says what the top collision things are for that intersection, right? The primary cause factors. Mm-hmm. I don't see that in there in the report. Did I miss that? You tell me throughout the whole thing, unsafe speeds, all this, but for El Norte and Center City Parkway, what's the primary cause factor for that? Did I miss that in the report? Because I didn't see it.
I looked through it too, and I did not see that, because I was looking to see if I could find a breakdown of the accident.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So for that intersection, what's the primary cause factor for that intersection? And
They have the type of accident, like rear end crashes or side
Yeah.
swipe.
for that intersection?
Yeah.
Did I miss it? Okay. Yeah, but not the primary cause. Like what the reason why? Okay. Well, anytime you do a report, you're going to have the primary cause. That's why you're looking at the data on there. That's why I'm kind of wondering. It's good, like Bill says, it's a lot more data. Now it asks more questions. Okay, why should we have gone further and been more nuanced in it on it? But that's my kind of thing. Is this going to be something we're going to do to try to get funds, or we're going to look for something bigger towards these really going to the nitty gritty on these primary collision factors? Because 2021 isn't in here, and that's going to be literally a killer year when it comes to fatalities. So.
Commissioner Korbecki, I think that we've put together a list of countermeasures that we believe are effective at addressing the primary collision we are happy to go back and look at the data to confirm. But if you look across, those primary collision factors are pretty consistent throughout the city. You see them in all different intersections and all different locations. So I think we have come up with what we think are tried and true measures. Now, if speeding is a concern, there's only so much you can do with traffic, capital improvement measures to reduce speeding. There's a whole nother part of this, and that is, the work that we do with our police department and all of the enforcement that the police department does to on things like ensuring red lights are observed and people don't run through red lights, and lowering speeds, educating the public on the importance of those types of things. So I think we've come up with a group of improvements that are from the list of those available that work for addressing our primary collision factors. And the idea is that this is an iterative process, that we install those measures and then we evaluate their effectiveness, and then we look for opportunities to do more in areas where we need to. So this is not a problem that will be immediately solved at every location, but we believe that we've come up with a good list of projects in order to work to solve and make some good progress in the areas that we can.
I think the best we have that is page 21.
Okay.
Which has, it doesn't talk about it by intersection, but it's basically
Yeah.
unsafe speed, DUI, auto right-of-way violation. It's not grouped by intersection, but I think that's the biggest cause you see in this report, summary of causes.
And I agree. I saw that, but I didn't have the nuance for the intersection, because I thought since they've had all the data, it'd be like, okay, these are the top ones, primary cause factors for El Norte and Center City. So let's focus on that towards a problem.
It's probably speed. I mean, these are the top crashes causes in the city.
So it's the one thing is I just kind of just thinking about wondering if this is just, if we're just going to be looking more towards other things more than just that. But like you said, it seems like this is going to be something that we have. We're going to see how this works and continue on that area, because it is, as everyone's probably been here for a while, the sergeant's probably been here, it's just, that intersection is also very, very bad, and plus with other intersections, and it's just going to be constant improvement. I'm just hoping that it's just not going to be looked at and then, okay, that's it for the next 5 years. We're going to look at it again in 5 years more or 10 years more and relook at it. It's just, I just want to make sure that the money's being used and it's going to be used properly for what's actually causing the primary collision factors.
One thing maybe we could ask is staff, aside from this report, is have staff look at some of these corridors that have maybe unsafe speeds and see if there's a corridor level analysis or some other measures that could be done, aside from our program here. But I think those are some police enforcement, some other community outreach. My wife claims that most accidents were from people with their cell phones, which could be a case too, because that's what happens. And that's something that's probably hard to track here.
So, yeah, so that's so I mean, guess for this kind of thing, I have the answers for it, for this on it. But I think as we continue going further, I think more things need to be thought about when it comes to towards trying to figure out towards actual specific primary cause factors for those intersections, and do it more of a nuanced versus just a grand thing over everything. That's all. I said my piece.
I'll just say that, I think it's, it's trying to do something, and it's a low cost, it's worthwhile doing it. Just wondering if it'll actually do much for the actual problem that we've seen there. And I also looked through this on, no surprise, a lot of these are on Center City Parkway, is involved in just about every intersection, but that's where, some people think it's 40 and they drive 40, and other people say, well, geez, speed limit's really 65, and they drive 65. And when you got people driving 65 and 40 on the same road, you got problems.
Yeah, you hit the south side of town and the freeway's coming up. Some people go 70.
Shh. No one does 70.
Commissioner Casabon, any comments?
Thank you. Okay, and by the way, I just want to thank Commissioner Durney for bringing that out. I think that was very astute and very accurate, the questions that you're having on that. And Mr. Williams, thank you so much for all the work that you've done in putting this report. I'd also like to clarify, just for everyone here, exactly what the primary collision factor 22350, which is speed unsafe condition, what exactly that means when it's used in a traffic collision report. It doesn't necessarily mean the person is like speeding, like doing 16 to 45. It just means that, like, if somebody stopped in front of you, and even if you're doing 5 miles per hour and you rear end that person, that speed was unsafe for the conditions being a stopped vehicle in front of you. So some of these places where we're like maybe thinking about speed and we should be lowering the speed limit or whatever thoughts are coming into our minds, that's not the issue. The issue is somebody stop in front of you and you're rolling into them, whether it's 5 miles per hour, 20 miles per hour, probably at a speed that's actually less than the posted speed limit, but that's what speed unsafe conditions is. So it could be very low speed for the accident. And then I think you, Mr. Williams, you might have already answered this question for me, but I was flipping to page 25, because I was kind of wondering, because I pass through Valley Parkway and Midway Drive frequently. That's a big intersection I go through all the time. And I'm like, well, why are there so many accidents in this intersection? And so when I flipped over, it said, there was 13 rear end crashes there. And I'm like, why are people rear ending each other at Valley Parkway and Midway? But then you mentioned something that maybe was pedestrians could have been crossing the road and somebody had to stop suddenly in the intersection and then got rear ended by somebody else, which makes sense, because I just want to kind of make sure that these are true intersection crashes that we're talking about and not ones that just happen right outside the intersection, like, where people are stopped at the intersection and then, coming up, like they could be like 3 or 4 cars back and somebody's not paying attention, they rear end them because they didn't realize the light was red and that there was people stopped in front of them. But it sounds like these are true intersection crashes that are rear end crashes. That just, because usually intersection crash would be like somebody blowing the light or something like that. So it's just.
We had defined the intersection as within 125-foot radius of the center of the intersection.
Okay, so it does go outside of the intersection.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's actually really important, because in my mind, I was categorizing those as collisions occurring, mid-stretch collisions between intersections. But you're saying you're including 125 feet, did you say, outside?
Correct.
I don't know, to me, that kind of.
6 car lengths from the dead center of the intersection. So it might be 4 car lengths from the stop bar back.
To me, that kind of throws the statistics completely off, because that isn't a true intersection collision that way. That is on the roadway, then between the intersections. To me, that throws it off.
The reason that they wanted to do it that way is to avoid something that might have been classified as a mid-block or a segment crash. And then that was the recommendation for trying to narrow down what the intersection, actually the influence area of the intersection was.
Well, and especially larger intersections like Center City Parkway and El Norte, or many along Center City Parkway, you've got multiple lanes in each direction. If you're starting at the very midpoint of the intersection, you're 50 or 75 feet out, you're still barely at the edge of that roadway or the stop line for the cross street. So it's really, especially those large intersections, is just capturing what's happening at the intersection or is influenced by that intersection of the two streets.
Well, there's still a difference there. I mean, if you're within the intersection, there's boundaries to it. Usually it's the pedestrian walkways, and then inside of that is considered inside the intersection. To me, it'd be more of a, what were you calling it, between the different intersections, the different mid-length, mid-block? To me, either it has to be clarified more that, and made clear that 125-foot radius outside of the intersection is being included in that, and really make that clear, or it's got to be categorized as mid-block, because that changes the PCF, that changes, because that would explain why I'm seeing like all these rear-end collisions, and I'm thinking, why are these happening in the intersections? They're not. They're actually, that's 22-350, speed and safer conditions, people rear-ending people that are stopped for the red light, they're not paying attention. Oh my gosh, there's people stopped there, bam. to me, that just changes the whole pattern and everything about it.
I kind of agree with Commissioner Castlebaum. I think it's the approach to the intersection where you're influenced by the signal as you approach. The signal, it's changing, you're changing lanes, you see a yellow, a red, a green. That's all part of the intersection, I think. So I think the approach, to me, that makes sense. I mean, so you have a rear end because someone wanted to go through in the yellow and the car in front stopped, that's the intersection causing that. Even though it didn't happen in the intersection, it happened on the approach to the intersection, but it's caused by the intersection where cars are forced to stop or make a decision. I have to stop or I have to go. And that's all from the intersection. Mid-block, you're not deciding to stop or go. At the intersection, you just make that decision seconds before you get there.
All right, no, I understand what you're saying. I guess just maybe make that clear. I'm just going on my background. I was a CHP officer for 17 years and took a lot of traffic collisions, and intersection collision was in the intersection. And this would not have been considered an intersection collision if it occurred outside of it, just because people were stopped, like what you were saying. So I just thought maybe that could be clarified somewhere in the project, that just depends where your mindset is, I guess, on it. And then on a positive note, I actually had an epiphany on what to do with the intersection of Center City Parkway and Escondido Boulevard. Why not just shut that intersection down? That is an awkward intersection. Really not a lot of people use that because it is kind of an awkward intersection. And traffic would still have plenty of alternate routes and go down to Citricado and Escondido Boulevard, even though that's a little bit of an awkward intersection with those stop signs, the way they're placed there, but maybe improve a little bit on that intersection, or go up to Felicita and Escondido Boulevard or Center City Parkway, and make your turns that you have to there. But why not just get rid of that intersection?
So I think that's a great suggestion, one that we did evaluate, and I think it was before your time on the commission, but we did bring that idea to the commission, and so the commission asked us to look at the actual impact, and we did find that there's over 300 people making that left turn across Center City Parkway in the morning peak hour.
From Escondido Boulevard.
From Escondido Boulevard. So we were astounded because I personally wouldn't make that turn.
I think it's a huge movement going south to south.
Yeah. So the conclusion of the commission was that closing it down wasn't an option because it would result in a significant traffic impact.
I actually think the intersection at Citricado and Center City Parkway, which has been modified before, people have told me that why don't we do left turn permissives there, because that's another issue. But I think it works as good as it can for the geometry. It's just very awkward geometry. I mean, anytime you have an intersection between a major street and another street, you want certain distance between the streets, and this does not exist. And so it makes it hard. It's, the one intersection, two intersections act as one, so it's very challenging to get stacking and turning. It's there. That's why it is what it is still, because no one's found a good solution.
And probably why there's so much impact on that intersection of Center City and Escondido Boulevard in the morning is people are avoiding, it's the morning commute, and they're avoiding, traffic on the 15, trying to take little miscellaneous shortcuts and stuff. But thank you I didn't realize you'd already examined it, so thank you.
And if I recall, there's an intersection a couple of blocks south from that on Center City that used to be a free-for-all, much like that one, that we really did shut down and just make it one-way or whatever, if I recall correctly. We
Shut down
closed
two
that.
of them down there.
Brotherton.
Yeah,
Brotherton and the very one in the south.
right. And, people got used to it.
Yeah, get used to it. So I think they limited the number of access points to two now, Escondido Boulevard and Citricado, and they closed the other two, but
You're right. That one's I'm glad I got my car when I use that, because I know I can get through there.
Yeah. I had a few comments on the report. I think there's an error on page 23. Speaking of the intersection, it says that the broadside crashes are concentrated at major signalized intersections such as Center City Parkway and Escondido Boulevard, which obviously is unsignalized. So that was just an error on the very bottom, figure 5. And kind of like Bill said, and you, Craig, is when I looked at this report originally, these are all the major intersections in town. So of course they have the most crashes, there's most volume, and so you had that data that talked about I was going to ask you if you had data about, say, ADT, volume per crash, because that was, maybe there's some really small intersections that are unsafe and we don't see them because they only have, 10 accidents. And the only one I saw, there was maybe Morning View, which did make the list because that is a pretty small road, but Morning View did seem to have a lot more accident data compared to other. I didn't really see any of those smaller streets on the list, but it's, Valley Parkway and all the major streets. And so, of course, there's accidents there. So that was just an observation. I think one question I had and I kind of agree with Bill too in that I think, in my opinion, we should do our best to really reduce the number of pedestrian crashes or bicycle crashes those are the ones that are more severe with injury, because obviously, when you have a car and bike or car and peds, they're very severe. And so with the signal measures, there are two things one question I had is, and I refresh my memory, our city's policy on the Continental crossings, right? The high visibility crosswalks, we call them. Are we doing those? Some other intersections talk about adding new pedestrian striping, and some talk about just adding the countdowns. But can we add that to the scope of these intersections to install the high visibility crosswalks, or is that not city standard still, or only in the school zones? I kind of forget. Ali took us through it years ago, but I'm not sure where we stand. My point being is every city in this county does high visibility crosswalks. Every exhibit you showed from AFHWA has high visibility crosswalks. So I know there's more paint, more maintenance, but
Actually, what I heard when we've talked about that in the past is there's less maintenance because cars are driving through.
Maybe we're doing it. I'm not sure. It didn't really say we're doing high visibility crosswalks. I think
And I'm seeing more and more of them as I drive around, so I think from what I can see, we're using that more often than we have been.
I know we're doing it at school zones. I wasn't sure of these intersections, if we're going to propose that with these projects or not. Didn't really mention that.
So you'll recall that initially when we adopted our high visibility standard, we adopted a ladder standard, and that was based on the input from the school districts, that having the outside bars was an advantage. But as we saw the region go more and more towards the Continental crosswalks, we had another conversation with the school district and talked a little bit more about, hey, this is kind of it wasn't standard when we had this conversation 5 years ago, but it's becoming a standard, and, we're going to be an outlier. And so we did get the district support, and I think it was probably maybe about a year ago or so, we came to the commission and formally adopted the Continental, maybe you weren't here, Commissioner Thornburg, at that meeting, but we officially adopted the Continental Crosswalk as the city's standard high visibility crosswalk.
All intersections?
Yes, we're using that at intersections, locations.
Like when we do stripe crossings for the projects on this list, or market crosswalks, we're going to add the Continental crosswalks, or was it just in certain areas for some reason? That was the original.
I thought that was our standard throughout the city.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that for the countermeasures that particularly are identified by Caltrans, it does talk about high visibility crosswalks, that's what this funding would be for.
I just didn't see those countermeasures in any of our projects. And I was curious, if we're going to do all this PED work, why wouldn't we not add that to the list, even though it's not a lot of money, I don't think, but so I would think that would be part of that scope when they do those intersections, but they didn't say.
Yeah, each of these countermeasures talks about a high visibility crosswalk when you're installing a crosswalk.
Okay. But several of them already have crosswalks, which is like, say, Center City. Well, all the ones on East Valley Parkway, they have crosswalks, and we're adding countdown timers and hardware on the signal and the interval of the lead pedestrian interval. But it didn't say we're including a high visibility crosswalk, so that's my concern. If that's include that countermeasure, great. I didn't see it in there. Yeah. And other question was what I've seen. I don't see it very often, but some intersections have, I think it's what they call it, but it's basically a big red arrow on a box that comes on when PEDs are going, so basically stops people from taking a right turn. And I've only seen a few in the region. And was that something that was analyzed? Are you aware of that? Michael Baker looked at those, or just?
I have seen those around the region as well as around the country. I don't think that we've installed any either yet, but they're very specific for preventing a right turn on red, particularly in a
High pedestrian area.
high crash area or a high speed area, or high pedestrians. Right. I don't know that
I didn't see it as a countermeasure anywhere, but I just was curious if it was being.
Not here in Escondido yet.
No. Well, even listed in the countermeasure options that you went through, it didn't really talk about that. Maybe it's inherent in some of the signal modifications, but.
I don't know. I will look for that, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember is that we're selecting the highest, the most beneficial countermeasures that will get us the best chance of getting grant funded. But each of these projects will get an individual design. So we'll look at that particular intersection and determine what's appropriate for that particular intersection. And it'll get its own set of striping and signing plans and a lot of times signal plans. So those kinds of details are things that we can definitely look at as we get into the actual design of each of the projects.
Understand. Thank you. Let's see. Any more questions? Not for me. Anyone else on this local safety plan? So do we want to make a motion? Any modifications?
I want to say thank you. You've done a great job on all this. I appreciate it, and thanks for putting up with us and our questions, and I move to approve it.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay. A lot of talk for nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say you asked some excellent questions.
Okay, thank you. That's why they pay us the big bucks. Okay, next on the agenda is old business. The project status report.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Virpi Kukkaruotsalainen, and I'm an associate traffic engineer here with the city. I get to present the fun item G, old business. We changed things up a little bit. This is the item that used to be just written on the agenda, and we would read it out loud. But this time we prepared a report, which was attached in the agenda package, and then today I'm just going to show some update pictures, which were not in the report. So I'm not going to go over all the projects that you had in the report. I'll just show a couple of highlights. So first one is the Tmpl project cycle. I just wanted to remind you that in April we're going to be talking about the next cycle. So we're now accepting nominations from school districts and residents. There's a mention of that in our website. We have a Tmpl project page, and you can see the address at the bottom. We are updating the page right now. You also might remember that from this current cycle, we had 2 projects that were not nominated. They didn't make the cut last time, but we're reevaluating them and including them in the April package. So we have the Hidden Valley Middle School crosswalk improvements, and then we have Felicita Elementary School crosswalk improvements. And we have a couple other projects that were already nominated, so we'll talk about more of those in April. The second big project, very exciting, is the Traffic Signal Communication Grant project. We were successful in our grant application, and we will have the project funded with the grant and the local share, with the cost estimate about $2.3 million. With this project, we will design and install software and hardware upgrades to our traffic signal communication system. So we're very excited about that. With the funding, we will upgrade the signal controllers. You might remember that we have the 170E controllers, which are not manufactured anymore, so it is time that we update. We're also going to improve the vehicle detection and the communication devices. So all these upgrades will significantly improve our signal operations. It's going to make our signals more responsive, so we will have real-time access to all of our signals at all times. It will also support optimizing the signal timing and create those green waves that all the drivers appreciate. So right now we are in phase 1 of this project, which is the engineering part. The request for proposals are out right now, and we are expected the proposals to come in on March 4th, so pretty soon. The next big project is the Citricado extension project. Every once in a while it makes the newspapers. I know that all of you are aware of the project.
I think they're tired of this story. Oh, sorry. Go.
So I just wanted to show some pretty pictures. So that's on the left, you see what's out there today, and then the second picture on the right is also what is out there today. The intersection over there is the location for the future new traffic signal at the mobile home park entrances. So this project is going to fill a half-mile gap between the Harmony Grove Village Parkway and Andreasen Drive, but it's also going to widen the Citricado Parkway between Valley Parkway and Avenida del Diablo. So this new route is going to provide improved access to the hospital, and it also creates a southern access to a planned industrial park. We will also construct a 250-foot bridge over Escondido Creek. I see that a word went missing on that. Not over Escondido, but over Escondido Creek. We will have sound walls on both sides of Citricado Parkway, going from Johnston Road up to Avenida del Diablo. We will have 2 new traffic signals and 2 signal modifications with this project.
A question on that, where you say you're widening Citricado Parkway. I'm assuming you're not really widening it. It's more like you're going to remove the median that's there to make the roadway wider, but the outside boundaries are still the same.
Yes, the footprint is not going to increase.
Huh?
Tear a few houses down, no big deal.
No, they're not tearing houses down, and they're not moving the mobile home park.
Yeah, no, yeah, that is correct, yes.
Okay.
So it's a long segment. I just wanted to show you some perspective. So we have the plan set is quite impressive. Couple of intersections I wanted to show you. So at Johnston Road, in the new design, we're going to have a raised median. So that means that there is one-way traffic right out only at Yankee Court and Johnston Road. At Mountain Shadows, that's the location of the mobile home parks, and that's going to be the new signal. Then at Avenida del Diablo, where we currently have the delineators obstructing or guiding the traffic, at that location we're going to extend the existing raised median. And then we have a signal mod at the beginning of this new segment at Harmony Grove Village Parkway. The next project is Grand Avenue Vision Project. I don't know if you've been downtown lately, but last Friday the downtown looked like the picture on the right. There's a lot going on, but all the businesses are open. We are, with this project, we'll install new lighting from Maple Street to Kalmia Street, very nice festive lighting. The sidewalk is also going to be widened on the north side of Grand Avenue from Maple Street to Broadway. We're going to improve parking. We're going to restripe to include diagonal parking, which will increase the number of parking spots from Maple Street to Kalmia. And this is only the phase 1 of the project. We already have an agreement of phase 2, which is going to be 2.5 blocks of sidewalk, additional sidewalk extension, and a traffic circle at North Broadway. And this construction is estimated in about 2023.
And is that a giant avocado I see under the tree?
It is. I'm not, or yes, street art. Yeah, I cannot promise that the avocado will be there, but, but the sidewalk will be there.
Like the artist took Little Italy and just put avocado in there instead and called it Escondido.
I mean, it looks like an avocado.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Just curious, so the sidewalk widening's on the north side only, not the south?
Yes.
Is the south a future phase, or just that's the way the geometry worked out and the north side gets the widening? I'm just curious.
I think we have, Julie is very familiar with this project, so.
It alternates depending on the block from
Oh, okay.
north to south.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our first, I don't know if that works. So our first phase that's under construction now will only widen the north side between Maple and Broadway. But we do in phase 2, which we already have money set aside for, we will be widening the south side between Maple and Broadway. So Maple and Broadway will be fully complete. And then we'll also be widening both sides between Broadway and Juniper. So Broadway to Kalmia, Kalmia to Juniper. So that's pretty exciting. And we're also going to be building a traffic circle at Broadway and Grand. So
Now, I see construction already on the south side, but it looks maybe more like pipes that they're putting in, and they've got a ton of pipes over at the old Center City High School.
So the construction that you see on the south side is light foundations. We'll be installing new street lights that will be similar to the existing acorn-style lights, but taller, because those new street lights will serve as a mounting point for festoon lighting or market lighting that will be crisscrossing the street between Maple and Kalmia. So pretty exciting project.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you're really interested and want to follow up on the project, we have a weekly update on the website, and you can actually you can request to get a newsletter weekly. So there is the website on the bottom.
Yeah, can't wait for Cruising Grand to come back.
So the next project I wanted to show you is the Palomar Heights project at the location of the old Palomar Hospital. This mixed-use development project will construct a new signal at Ivy, and we'll have 3 signal modifications, so that's on the traffic side. On the bottom you can see what it looked like on Friday, and then on the top what it will look like in the future. So that's very exciting. It's going to transfer the downtown view completely. And then the next one is Carbana. You may have noticed that the Carbana Tower is up. I was actually out there today. We're not striping, the contractor is striping, but the signal is getting set up. We'll have new accessible pedestrian push buttons, APS, and new striping. On the right side, you can see the plan. So we will be adding a second left turn lane from Hale onto Tulip. So that's going to improve the capacity quite a bit. Then we have the Villages project, which I was told now is called Canopy Grove, same project. That's where we have our first roundabout constructed. So on the left you can see the Country Club Lane roundabout at Golden Circle. And then on the right side is the future location for the La Brea roundabout. So it's the roundabout itself is not being constructed right now, but they're doing other work. So with the Villages project, I still keep calling it Villages out of old habit, the Canopy Grove project. In traffic, just looking at the traffic side, we have the roundabout, then we have a new traffic signal at Gary Lane. Then at Firestone Drive, which is the 3 arrow in the picture, that's the rectangular rapid flashing beacon that's going to help the pedestrians cross. Then we have the second roundabout at La Brea, and then we have a new traffic signal at Nutmeg. And on the right, you can see the the location for the beacon. So the little sample of the striping that's going to be added is we have the new raised median, and then we still allow on-street parking. We have buffered bike lanes on both sides of the street. And then the last one, I believe, is the Oak Creek development. This is the new construction, private development of Felicita Road. There is going to be yet another roundabout at Park Drive. So on the picture, that's what Park Drive looks today, and then that's where the new roundabout is going to be located. And I just wanted to add the little duck crossing sign because we have taken care of the ducks also. So we noted that one. So we'll have buffered bike lanes. In addition, the all-way stops are going to be added at Hamilton Lane, and then we'll have the roundabout. So that completes my presentation.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions of any of the projects? No.
Exciting projects, thank you. A lot of activity going on in the city.
Yes, a lot going on, yeah. Thank you.
Next is school area safety. Is there a presentation on this?
I'll just read through the item if so you'd like me to, Virpi. Yeah, it was just. Okay, just want to make sure, sorry. So staff has conducted site visits in coordination with EUSD and PD to observe traffic on North Broadway corridor in efforts to improve traffic flow and safety. Potential improvements are under evaluation and design.
Excellent. Council actions?
Yes, I can go through those. On November 17, 2021, City Council Transportation Safety Workshop and presentation given in cooperation with Police Department and Engineering Services Department. The meeting broadcast can be viewed at the City Council on the city's website. November 17, 2021, resolution number 2021-133, awarding the Escondido Creek Trail Crossings Project construction contract to Tri Group Construction Incorporated. And number 3, January 12, 2022, resolution number 2022-06, awarding the Escondido Creek Trail Transit Center Bike Path Improvements at Quince and Tulip Streets Project construction contract to PAL General Engineering Incorporated.
Thank you. Oral communications, we discussed that. Are there any other speakers we need to bring up now, or? Seeing none, any Transport Commissioner comments? The floor is open. Any comments?
I'm out of comments, thank you.
Commissioner Hartley, no? All right, I have some comments. So this kind of goes on what we talked about before. Is when I was looking through the plan, I really saw a lack of pedestrian and bicycle improvements in town. And I was at a few meetings last few months with the new District 11 commissioner, or I guess director, and he was mentioning that Caltrans we're the California Department of Transportation. We are not the Division of Highways. And he mentioned all their projects that have multiple modal aspects and all the different work they're going to do. Then the next week, there's a lady walking on the 78 where Caltrans put these nice ped ramps in, but there's no sidewalks. And she's walking in the street because there's nowhere to walk, and she almost got hit. And then I was telling someone how they, Sharrows, you can only do Sharrows 35 miles an hour or less. There's one right there at 45 miles an hour around the big yew tree on the 78. So my point was, I think we need some really more grand visions of basically bike and ped corridors in the city. We have the missing link, we have the creek, and we have the Inland Rail Trail. That gets you east-west. There's no way to go north-south in a good pedestrian or bike corridor. You have Class 2 bikeways with some Sharrows, but those are not very safe. So I challenge staff to get kind of visionary on maybe a big northwest link. Maybe you can have Caltrans build it on the 78. It'd be great. That's my comment. Oh, you going to address my comment already? It's already in the works. I didn't know about it. I missed the meeting. Oh.
I just wanted to add, and I think we've talked about this in the past, but we do intend to be issuing an RFP for a comprehensive active transportation strategy for the city. It's a it should be a fairly robust effort, and we'll be hoping to involve all of you to help us identify some of those deficiencies. I mean, that doesn't help us a lot on 78 since it's, Caltrans right away, but certainly those will be, for example, identifying where our sidewalk gaps are around the city and where the really high generators and destinations will be around the city, so we can focus our investments that way. So we're looking forward to that effort.
Good plan. So in the report, though, one of the intersections was, Ash and Valley Parkway. So does staff have a regular discussion with Caltrans about the 78 corridor and things they can improve on, or do we let them manage it as they will? I just think they're kinder and gentler than they used to be.
We actually had a number of discussions back and forth with Caltrans when, toward the later phase of their planning for 78, a lot of the bikeway facilities that are on 78 were a result of those conversations.
Good.
The bike lanes on Broadway particularly were a result of that. The Sharrows, they couldn't do much on Washington because there simply isn't enough room. The Sharrows were part of that. The Sharrows along Ash, at least down to 3rd, and then the bike lanes continued on there. So that issue had come up with some earlier meetings, and we followed through with Caltrans, and I think we're happy with what they did provide. Retrofitting sidewalks is extremely difficult and expensive. So it's, I think at that time, for what they envisioned for this reconstruction of 78, I think it was beyond the scope of what they were thinking of. So
it was more of a maintenance project, and so that was their budget. But I think they can look at a sidewalk from downtown to Bear Valley Parkway or somewhere around there. That's that's a school zone. I mean, so yeah. I know I saw the county put a ped ramp in at Bear Valley Parkway and on Arroyo. I'm like, where it doesn't even go anywhere. But like someday there's going to be a sidewalk through here. So
yeah,
someday let's make it happen.
Yeah, good.
Those are my
Look
comments.
forward to working with you on that.
Me? No, Caltrans. There's a new director. Julie should meet him. Take him to lunch. Have him start building some stuff on the 78.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Those are my comments. Where's Commissioner Spoonmore? Okay, I think that ends our agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Second. Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.